Are you all about yourself? Can you imagine putting your life on the line for a friend? Well, today, Jonathan is going to give us an example of love and devotion to others. Welcome to another edition of Sunday School with the Deek. I am Deacon Wallace Hill IV, proud member of the Mount Pisgah Missionary Baptist Church, where my father, the Honorable Wallace Hill III, is the pastor. I'm so happy to be coming into your living rooms, and to your cell phones, and to your televisions, and to your tablets once again. And I want to thank you, everybody, for tuning in each week. Our viewership just seems to continue to go up, and I owe it all to you guys. And I just want to thank you for taking 45 minutes out of your day each week to listen to the Deek break down the Sunday school lesson based on the International Lesson Series. So for those of you that are new, though, to this channel, do me a favor, take your finger, go down to the bottom of the page, hit that little subscribe button, and then hit that little bell. And each time the Deek uploads another lesson, ding, 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 you will know that the Deek has uploaded another lesson. So, today we're in our new unit of the fall quarter. This unit is entitled Inclusive Love. And so for the next 4 weeks, we'll be in the books of 1 Samuel, Luke, and 1 Corinthians. And the focus of these lessons is on love for a stranger, or love for your enemies, or love, or divine love reflected in our lives. So today in 1 Samuel, we'll show Jonathan's love for someone else. And it was actually towards David. And we'll have 2 lessons in the book of Luke that explores the teachings of Jesus. One for loving your enemies, and the other a parable of a good Samaritan. And then our last lesson for this unit will be in 1 Corinthians, and that'll focus on Paul's sermon on the height of human love coming from divine love. So our lesson today is only 7 verses, but I should probably give you a little background to the text, so don't get too excited thinking I won't have you for 45 minutes. I actually don't know how long this will go, but the background is quite extensive. So our lesson starts in chapter 19 of 1 Samuel, but the characters start to formulate in earlier chapters. And so Saul, you might want to get some paper. Write this stuff down if you haven't read the verses. Or if you want to stop right now and go read chapters 16 through 18. That might help you out quite a bit. But anyway, our lesson starts in chapter 19. So Saul is the king at the time. Now he was made king of Israel because the people felt like they just had to have a king. Everybody else had a king. They wanted a king. Up until this point, Israel had judges. So you read between when Moses got them over to the promised land, and now they had judges. But now they want a king. The people wanted a king, and God gave them what they wanted. God was not pleased that they wanted a king because he told them that he was their king, but he went ahead and obliged. And Saul made several mistakes as king, mostly for not being obedient and not trusting God. And because of this, God said that his family would not have the throne after him. So in the meantime, God was preparing a new king. He was a scrawny little boy who was a sheep herder, and he was the most unlikely of all his brothers to be the king. But when the prophet Samuel went to his house and poured oil over David, the oil flowed, which signified that he would be the next king. So, but David couldn't take the throne right away. The current king, which was Saul, had to die before David could be king. So one day, when Saul and his army was out fighting the Philistines, David's father sent David to the battle to take his brother some food and to check on him. Because David's three brothers, older brothers, were in the army. So when David arrived, he noticed how this giant, I think he was like 11 feet tall, this giant of the Philistines by the name of Goliath had everyone running scared. Now nobody could defeat Goliath, and every day Goliath would come out and torment the Israelite army. And so David asked for the opportunity to go fight him. Well, we pretty much know how that story goes, right? David wasn't supposed to be there, but David was supposed to be there, if you get what I'm saying. Sometimes God puts you in places that you're not supposed to be at in order to elevate you. Think about that. You're not supposed to be there in other people's minds or by other people's standards, but God wants you to be there, and that's all that matters. God was with David, and David went towards this giant when all of Saul's army was running the other way from him. And even King Saul didn't want no part of this. So he offered David to take his armor and his sword and all of that stuff, but David refused it. Now, mind you, David was a teenager. He was a little shepherd boy, had no military experience, but God was with him. Okay? So giving God all the credit, David slew Goliath and cut his head off and took it back to King Saul. Now, in the 18th chapter is where we see Saul starts to become jealous of David. It was in this same chapter that we see David and Jonathan become really, really close friends. Now see, Jonathan is the son of King Saul. And as we study this lesson, I want you to think about how strong of a man Jonathan had to be, not to only have any jealousy towards David, but also to love him like a brother. See, Jonathan should be next in line for the throne. But he befriends David and develops a loving friendship with David. So chapter 18 opens up by saying, the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David. And Jonathan should be positioning himself to be the next king, y'all. But here, as he watched David defeat the Philistines, as he watched David defeat Goliath, he sits and listens to how much his father is appreciative of David. Something happened. It says his soul was knit with the soul of David. And so when you knit two things together, or when you sew two things together, they're brought together by something else, right? And so two pieces of fabric are brought together by a piece of string. Here, these two souls are joined together by the Holy Spirit. And see, David won Jonathan's heart by what he had done for his father. Most people would probably be jealous, but Jonathan was drawn to David. And sometimes I think about what it would be like to help my father out a little bit more in the ministry. I see others come to our church and people who are much younger than me, they come and preach when my dad is not there, or they come preach on special anniversary days at our church. And I hear my dad refer to people as my son in the ministry and things like that. But the last thing that comes to my mind is jealousy. We should never be jealous of anybody who's trying to promote God's agenda, or somebody who is clearly being moved by God to do something. So what God has for you is for you, and I'm comfortable with that. And if God wants you to have something, there's nothing that anybody can do to take it away from you. We learned that with Joseph last week, or the last few weeks. So Jonathan looked at David and what he had accomplished and how his dad had taken a liking to him. And not to mention that Jonathan was a man of God as well. So, God will give you discernment about people when you meet them. God will, truly speak to you about certain people and give you a certain feeling about certain people. It says that Jonathan loved David as his own soul. Now, in the 18th chapter is the first time that David meets Jonathan, but his soul is connected with Jonathan right away. It says that from their initial meeting, he loved David like he loved himself. And if that ain't God, I don't know what is, y'all. The Bible doesn't really tell us how old Jonathan was or David was at the time, but if you kind of use some facts about the timing and what the Bible gives us, we can kind of back into how old they were. David was probably right around 18 years old because he still wasn't old enough to fight in the army. And then Jonathan was around 28. So there was about 10 years that separated these guys, but they were similar in their wisdom and similar in their courage and similar in their faithfulness to God and to their families. And I'm sure that's what drew these guys to each other. And I always say, and I'm going to say it to the day I die, birds of a feather flock together. I have never seen a blue jay hanging out with a cardinal. I've never seen a sparrow hanging out with an oriole. So you always see them with each other. And you're naturally attracted to those that are like you. And those people that you connect with are your true friends. We always talk about the love between a man and a woman, but we rarely talk about the love between a man and a man. And I'm not talking about that other kind of love. I'm talking about men who can look at each other and see mirror images of each other. And two men who could be real friends and do things together and not have any jealousies and enjoy being in each other's company. And that's a thing of beauty, y'all. Especially when you can do it in the Lord. I have a group of friends that I chat with almost every day, and I love them all. And because they all watch the Deek, I'll show them some love today. My boy Elgin, we call him Uncle L. My boy Bruce, that's BJ. My boy Benny. My cousin Keith, who just had a birthday this week. Happy birthday, cuz. And my boy Rodney. And my boy Mark down in Louisville. And my boy Jeff, we call him J. Lil. And my brother Daryl. And I also have my boy Dallas in Grand Rapids. So anyway, I love y'all all enough. I know we give each other a hard time all the time, but I just wanted to show y'all some love today. So anyway, back to the lesson. David and Jonathan make a pact with each other to be friends forever. And Jonathan even gave David his robe and his sword and his bow. And after David defeated Goliath, Saul was so happy with David that he put him over all his armies. But then one day something happened after David came back from a battle. The women started singing a song saying, King Saul has killed 1,000, but David has killed 10,000. And I don't know what the chorus was or nothing like that. But it was at this point that Saul became furious and jealous of David. And he spent the next few years trying to kill David. And other things happened in the rest of chapter 18. Saul doesn't give David the wife that he promised him after he killed Goliath. But Saul's youngest daughter fell in love with David. Saul told David he can have her if he went and killed 100 Philistines and bring back their penises. Now, I know this is a PG station, and this is the Bible, but it's true. That's what it said. The Bible calls them foreskins. So Saul was hoping that David would get killed in trying to achieve this mission. Go read it, y'all. But check this out. David came back with 200 penises. Saul would now know that they belong to the Philistines because Jews were circumcised, right? So they were the only ones that circumcised their boys. So he would know they belonged to these Philistines. So when David did that, Saul had to give his youngest daughter, Michal, to David to marry. And the Bible says that Saul was afraid because he knew that God was with David. And at this point, he understood that. Now I'm going to read verses 28 through 30 of chapter 18, and then we'll get into the lesson. Verse 28, I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Verse 28 says, when Saul realized that the Lord was with David and how much his daughter Michal loved him, Saul became even more afraid of him, and he remained David's enemy for the rest of his life. And verse 30, every time the commanders of the Philistines attacked David, was more successful against them than all the rest of Saul's officers. So David's name became very famous. Now the lesson moves into chapter 19. That's where we start, and our lesson begins here. That was only 16 minutes of an introduction. Here we go. Verse 1. And Saul spake to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants, that they should kill David. It says, and Saul spake to Jonathan, his son, the son that should rightfully be the heir to the throne when Saul was no longer around. He knew that his son and David were the best of friends. And he knew that his son loved David. But he also was hoping that the familial love would overtake the friendship love that Jonathan had for David. See, sometimes we feel like no matter what the situation is, family should trump any other type of relationship. And let me take that back. I won't say that we all feel like that, but I will say it's usually the people that treat you bad that feel like no matter what they do to you or how they treat you, family should come before anything. They say blood is thicker than water. Well, Saul brings Jonathan in on the conversation that he's having with his servants in hopes that Jonathan would listen to his father over his friend. So he's hoping that Jonathan will finally see that David was a threat to him as taking over as king. And he also wanted him to see where Jonathan's true loyalty lies. So he's trying to make this case where if we don't get rid of David, then you can't be king, son. So he wanted to see where his loyalty lied. Was his loyalty to his daddy or was his loyalty to his friend? So he shared with them, hey, we want to kill David. I want to kill David. Now, if there's one way to find out about where your son's loyalty lies, tell him that you plan to kill his friend. Saul puts his son in a very difficult place. So Saul told this to Jonathan, but it says he also told it to his servants, who in the earlier verse, if you look at chapter 18, verse 5, it said they liked David as well. So he puts his servants in a difficult place. But I'm sure Saul knew who his go-to men were. The people that when push comes to shove, gonna follow you no matter what. And those are the loyal people that Saul probably had around giving his plan to. And these are the ones that he brought into the fold to help him to kill David. So they were treating David like he was a traitor or something. The man had done nothing wrong. The only thing that he was guilty of is loving Saul and taking out every order that Saul gave to him. And you see, I don't really believe Saul's problem is with David. Saul didn't like the praise that David was getting from others, especially the women. They sang songs and they did chants and he was a handsome guy. He was well liked by everybody. And see, jealousy is the real deal, y'all. My old boss tried to fire me because of jealousy. And get this, she was the boss of me, right? How you gonna be jealous of me and I work for you? Saul was the king, yet he was jealous of an 18-year-old boy. So Saul wanted to kill David for nothing. Does that sound familiar? Well, this put David in a difficult position as well, because now David don't know who to trust. Verse 2. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill you. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. So it says, but Jonathan's son delighted much in David, delighted in his company, delighted in his conversation, delighted in their friendship. They had an awesome friendship, and the relationship was not one-sided. It was two-sided, and it was mutually respected. This was good for David because this is going to help him going forward. Put a pin in that. David already knows that Saul has some kind of jealousy thing going on, because a spear came flying at him in chapter 18. One day David was playing the harp for King Saul to help soothe his spirit, and jealousy just overcame Saul, and he threw a spear out of the blue at David, and it missed. But having an ally like Jonathan is going to prove to go a long way. And that's why I mentioned to you earlier, you never know why God puts people in your life. Or why he puts you in people's lives. You could be the one to save someone from destruction. So Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Jonathan was showing his true friendship and his loyalty here. Sometimes if your family members are wrong, it is what it is. Wrong is wrong. It doesn't matter who's wearing it, right? Friend or foe. And if your daddy is wrong, it don't mean you got to go along with it just because he's your daddy. You got to respect him, but he can be wrong at times. It says, now therefore I pray thee, take heed of thyself until the morning. It must have been the evening when he told David this about his father's plans. And besides, he didn't know what kind of plans his father had. He might have had one of his cronies come looking for him that night for David. So he says, take heed to thyself. In other words, be careful and take care of yourself tonight. Don't get too caught up in what's going on. Just trust God. And the same God that was with you when you fought the lion, the same God that was with you when you fought the bear, the same God that was with you when you fought the giant Goliath. Sometimes, we get so caught up in the moment that we forget about all the good that God has done and how much he has brought us through in our life. If he did it once, y'all, he can do it again. Don't forget about the difficult times that God has brought us through, and then get so caught up in this one that you feel like he can't do what he did in the last one. So he says here, go to your secret place and hide yourself. So Jonathan seems to think that it's not safe for David to stay in his own bed that night. So he told him to go to a secret place, a place where nobody will know where he was at and where he might be. The next verse suggests that he should probably go out into a field. Let's go to verse 3. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field, where thou art. And I will commune with my father there. And I will see, and what I see I will tell thee. He says, and I will go out. So he's referring to in the morning when his father normally goes out for a morning walk. And I'm going to stop right there. There ain't nothing like a morning walk, y'all. When I was working from home during the quarantine, I woke up every morning and I walked for an hour, praying, listening to music, or just something to get the heart rate up. And yesterday, before I started studying this lesson, I was out at 6 a.m. walking and reading 15 chapters on David and Saul. And then this morning at 6:30, I was out walking, watching CNN on my phone about what's going on with our president in the hospital and COVID-19 and all of that. But my point is, if you have a neighborhood you can walk in and you haven't tried it, try it. It's really peaceful and serene, and it's good, and it's good for you. Anyway, that's the Deek's healthy advice for the day. I digress. He says, I will go out and stand beside my father in the field that thou art. So this is how I assumed he wanted David to go out into a field, because the last verse said, go find somewhere to hide. And this verse says, I will stand beside my father in the field where thou art. So he's doing this so David can be near and he can hear what is being said between him and his father. So this is a true friend, y'all. He says, I will commune with my father of thee. In other words, I'm going to bring you up. So he's going to try to speak in favor of his friend to his father and see if he could talk him out of killing him. So in order to convince him that it would be best for him and be best for Israel if David was still alive. So, and he says, and what I see, I will tell thee. That's what the next part says. So whatever David couldn't hear or couldn't tell by Saul's facial expressions or whatever, Jonathan said he's going to tell him and fill him in later. So this is also David will know what he's up against, because David is just an innocent little boy. He doesn't really know everything that's going on. And I admire Jonathan for taking this stance that he did. He didn't want any part of what his dad was trying to do. And he could have just stayed out of it and just said, I'm not going to help my father do what's wrong. But he could also said, I'm not going to stop it either, right? He could have did that. He could have took that. And, he could have said, I'm just going to remain neutral and let God work it out. And I know we are under the authority to submit to God's authority in many different areas. There's in the Bible it says we submit to certain things. Children should submit to their parents, and citizens should submit to their government, and employees should submit to their employers, and Christians should submit to church leaders, and husband and wives should submit to husbands, and things like that. But in these relationships, you are never excused from sin because you obeyed an authority that told you to sin. And so, in this case, it would be wrong for Jonathan to obey his father and kill David, because that's a sin against God. So let's go to verse 4. And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul, his father, and said unto him, let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee word very good. And so Jonathan spoke good of David to Saul, his father. Jonathan is about to put himself at risk for his friend, y'all. The next morning, Jonathan carried out the plan that they had just came up with. He talked about how good of a man David was, and all the good things he had done for him and the country. And sometimes, sometimes people get so caught up in their emotions that they can't really see the big picture. That's why it's good sometimes to just stop, take a deep breath, step back, and get out of your emotions. Saul knew that David killed that Philistine, but Saul convinced himself that David killed that Philistine for all the wrong reasons. He thought David did it just to become famous or to take the throne from him. Now, making him out to be a traitor. He made it seem like he was justified in killing David, just because he felt like he had to kill David before David killed him. Now, Jonathan's trying to bring him back to reality. He talked to him about all the wars that David had won for them and how he managed the army for him. Talked to him about the courage and the valor that this man shows in representing him against other nations. Now, I'm sure he mentioned that David was his friend too. And that David was Saul's son-in-law, right? He married his daughter. And not to mention all the times that David had played music for him to soothe his soul. So the next part says, and he said unto him, let not the king sin against his servant, against David. He's like, don't take his life. And Saul knew that was a sin against God and a sin against the law of Moses to kill. But he was going to do it anyway. And the next part of the verse says, because he has not sinned against thee. He hasn't disobeyed any orders. As a matter of fact, he did whatever Saul told him to do. And in many cases, he went above and beyond what Saul had told him to do. So he never tried to take his crown or lay a hand on Saul. And you would think that might be something he would be trying to do, since Samuel told him that God had picked him as the next king. You see how good of a man David was? He has this man trying to kill him for no reason. A man that he's been completely loyal to, a man that he gave his all to. And God has already told him that he's going to be the next king. Most of us would be like, screw this, let's fight. Or screw this, if I can beat a bear and I can beat a lion and I can be a giant, I can beat you, Saul, and then I can become king. But David was patient, y'all. And that's what I love about David. He was going to let God bring him to his promise in his own time. He wasn't going to force God's promise on his own time. Does that make any sense? The next part of the verse says, and because his works have been to thee-ward very good. Jonathan is referring to what David did by slaying the Philistines when they were running scared. By driving away evil spirits from Saul when he was playing the harp for him. Verse 5. For he did put his life in his hand and slew the Philistine, and the Lord wrought a great salvation for all of Israel. Thou sawest it, and didst rejoice. Wherefore, when wilt thou sin against innocent blood to slay David without a cause? Man, King James is so hard to read. Says, for he did put his life in his hand. He's referring to the day that David went and killed Goliath. David put himself in the utmost danger by going to face this giant. And it says he slew the Philistine. When everybody in Saul's army was running scared, when the giant came after him, David stepped up with God on his side with a slingshot and a pebble and put it right between his eyes. And it says the Lord wrought a great salvation for all of Israel. It was David that did that. He's doing his best job. Jonathan's doing his best job to get his father to see all the good that David has brought to his life and how God has allowed David to do for this nation. And when Goliath went down, all the Philistines ran. And Saul's army went and chased them and conquered them. And he said, Dad, have you forgotten about that? And I love this next part. It says, you saw it and didst rejoice. He said, you saw it with your own eyes. You were a witness, and you saw, it wasn't some folk tale. You saw it with your own eyes, and you were happy. You were happy. And you told him that you wouldn't even let him go back to his daddy's house. You said, no, you stand here with me because I want you to be a part of me and my army and live in my castle. And then it says, wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood to slay David without a cause? Why you going to kill him and have that on your conscience? Especially when the man haven't done anything. Do you want that blood on your hands, Dad? Verse 6. And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan. And Saul sware As the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. And it says Saul hearkened to the voice of Jonathan. And Saul heard his son. Not only heard him, but he was affected by what Jonathan said, and he was convicted by what Jonathan said at that present moment. You see that only lasts for a millisecond. But for now, the Lord actually worked on Saul's heart, which you can tell by what he says in the next part of the verse. He says, and I swear, as the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. Saul added this oath in order for Jonathan to know that he was serious about what he was saying. Kind of like, when we was kids, we used to say, I swear to God. Oh, wait a minute, no we didn't. We said, I swear for God. I swear for God. Man, we some lazy people, man. We can't even say the whole word before. We just swear, I swear for. Okay. Either Saul had a real intent on keeping his promise, which I said didn't last too long, or he was deceiving Jonathan to make David think, to make David rest and not feel like he was going to do something to him. But it really seems like here that he really meant what he said he was going to do. Verse 7, last verse, y'all. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all those things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as in times past. And Jonathan called David. So Jonathan called David from his hiding place in the field after Saul had left to go home. And Jonathan showed him all these things, meaning he shared everything that they had talked about between him and his dad, assuring him that he wasn't going to get killed. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, brought him back to his old position in the king's court, just like the good old times. Saul was good with it and treated him just like he always had. So he made true on his promise. He was courteous, and it seemed like everything was just like it used to be. And Saul had some good in him because God allowed him to be the first king. But he was known for doing some really good things in the beginning of his kingship. But something about David did something to him. And I'm telling you, the spirit of jealousy will destroy friendships. It will destroy family. It will destroy relationships. And just about anything else. We got to fight really hard against that spirit of jealousy. Even when others have it towards you, you got to fight to know that it is not them, but the Satan that has entered into them. And then it says, and he was in his presence as in times past. So, if you keep reading for the next 10 chapters, you'll see that it's a kind of reading that you really can't put down. Especially but I recommend you read it in another translation outside of King James because, so you won't get bogged down in the way King James writes. But you'll see the truce lasted about that long. He was soon back to trying to kill David. And David was running for his life for chapters and chapters of Samuel. And he finally rested in a place called Ziklag, if you're reading. And you probably remember that from one of our pastor's sermons. David ends up having 2 chances to kill Saul while he was on the run. One time while Saul was asleep, and another time while Saul was using the bathroom. But David didn't kill him. And that takes a man of God not to do that. He said he was going to let God deal with him. He was a true man of God. And it's funny how on one occasion Saul wanted to ask God for some help. This is funny. Saul was asking God wanted to ask God for some help, but God wouldn't hear him. So Saul disguised himself and went into a medium to do a seance to try to bring the prophet Samuel back, his spirit back to life, so he could talk to God for him. And so Samuel told him, no, I'm not going to do that. Your son and you are going to die. And sure enough, the very next day, Saul and his 3 sons, including Jonathan, were killed. And so David But David kept this promise to Jonathan after Jonathan's death, and he took care of Jonathan's family while he was king. He sought out and found Jonathan's disabled son, Mephibosheth, that's his name, and he took care of him. And if you read all of it, you'll see that Jonathan continued to put his life on the line for David up until his death. His father even tried to kill him. Their friendship was like no other recorded in the Bible. And I wish I had time to talk about all of this, but I don't have the time because there's so much I could talk about. But if you're going to be a friend to someone, you should do and be serious about it. So, takeaways from today's lesson. Sometimes water is thicker than blood. Right is right and wrong is wrong. And no matter who's doing it. Speak up for right, y'all. Speak up for right. And if you have a true friend, cherish that relationship. Because you may have to put your life on the line for it. Don't let your emotions and jealousies cloud your thinking. Jealousy is trying to do Job's God. Jealousy is you trying to do God's job. Think about it. By being jealous of someone, basically you're saying that other person doesn't deserve what they have and that you deserve it. You deserve it more. So let's not do that. And lastly, be open to reason. No matter who it comes from. Even if it comes from your child. Saul was, at least in these verses, open to reason. So that was good stuff today. Next week, we're going to be in the book of Luke. We'll be in chapter 6, verses 27 through 36. And the lesson is called Love Your Enemies. Whew! I think we better buckle up for that one, y'all. And we all need to pray all week that we can receive that lesson in the right spirit, because it is hard to love your enemies. Okay. Here ends another lesson. And thank you guys for commenting. I see you commenting on YouTube. I see you commenting on Facebook. Thank you. It just does my soul so good to let me know that you're out there. It's not like we're sitting in class and I can look over and see you smiling or nodding your head or anything like that. So it does me good to hear you share and comment. So like we say every week, may the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another. Amen. Sunday School with the Deek.